Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this recorded training update called the WeatherTrack Smart Water Management Network. Today we will be discussing how information moves through the WeatherTrack system. This demonstration will show how weather and usage information is exchanged across the WeatherTrack Smart Water Management Network by focusing on two questions. First, how does a WeatherTrack controller receive and use weather information? And second, what kind of information does a WeatherTrack central controller provide? Let's begin by discussing the method the WeatherTrack system uses to calculate and deliver weather information that is accurate to the square kilometer without the use of an on-site weather station or other external sensors. We call this WeatherTrack ET Everywhere. This process begins with our weather stations. Specifically, through our partnership with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and other scientific weather information sources, we are able to access weather information from more than 40,000 separate weather stations around the world. Each one of those weather stations is constantly collecting raw weather data and streaming that information online to our Climate Center. I use this map to demonstrate how HydroPoint's Climate Center team takes all of that raw weather data and applies to it a weather modeling program. Basically, what our Climate Center team does is listen to all of those weather stations and then use weather science to figure out what's happening in between each one of those weather stations. So they know where those storms have hit and how those fronts have moved, and what the weather has been like in every square kilometer, or roughly every half mile in the United States. When tested in an independent study, the WeatherTrack ET Everywhere information was proven to match an on-site weather station 98% of the time. So not only is our weather information very localized in terms of the 1 square kilometer resolution, but it is also proven to be very accurate. Once the weather information has been calculated for every square kilometer, then the Climate Center pushes that information out to the controllers, and each controller is updated with the weather information for the square kilometer that it sits in. Once the controller receives that ET value, it then applies it to each station, or the controller tells each station how much water evaporated yesterday. Then, using the WeatherTrack scheduling engine, each station decides first whether it needs to water or not. And if that station does not need irrigation, then it will take the day off. This is an important step in how the WeatherTrack saves water. Knowing which stations have enough water in the soil to keep the plant material healthy and not applying more water to those stations is a fundamental step in how the WeatherTrack system will reduce your annual irrigation water consumption by 20 to 50%. However, if those stations do need irrigation, the WeatherTrack scheduling engine decides how much irrigation needs to be applied and how best to apply that irrigation to deliver the most effective and efficient runtime. Now we have the answer to our first training question. How does a WeatherTrack controller receive and use weather information? Since 2002, HydroPoint Data Systems has used the ET Everywhere and WeatherTrack scheduling engine to receive and use weather information since our very first controllers were introduced with the ET Plus or the early WeatherTrack Pro Series controllers. Then, in 2008, we began using cell phone communication for the Pro 2 controllers, which allowed us to begin adding central internet management features. These central internet management features allow real-time communication to and from the WeatherTrack central controllers and give our users internet access to all of the information that the WeatherTrack Central can provide. This is where we begin discussing our second training question. What kind of information does a WeatherTrack central controller provide? To be clear, the remaining parts of this training are fully available only in our central controllers. So you may have an older ET Pro 2 model controller that are equipped with central features, but the Pro 2 Smart Water Manager was the first WeatherTrack where cell communication was standard with all controllers. So if you have this model or anything more recent than this, your WeatherTrack was designed for central features. These models include the WeatherTrack LC and the WeatherTrack ET Pro 3 model controllers. Now, let's discuss exactly what kind of information the WeatherTrack system creates, beginning with alerts. The system is capable of monitoring a certain number of things for you and providing a WeatherTrack alert if the system identifies that a situation might require management. Let's say, for example, something goes wrong with your irrigation system, like a bad valve or loss of communication. Or if your system is wired with a compatible flow sensor, we could even use the example of broken pipes or broken sprinkler heads. Now, if a situation like this should arise, the first thing the controller does is provide a built-in response designed to minimize the amount of water loss as well as reduce infrastructure and landscape damage. Then an alert would be raised at the controller, and in real time that information is sent to WeatherTrack Central or weathertrack.net. Then any user who has that WeatherTrack Central controller in their weathertrack.net Central user account can receive a text or email notification about that specific alert. Also, from weathertrack.net, you have on-demand access to all of the WeatherTrack features, including real-time on and off water functions, as well as access to controller settings and restriction information. In addition, weathertrack.net keeps a record of the controller history and can generate WeatherTrack reports about your controller settings, your measured or estimated usage, or track water budgets against an allocation or fiscal budgets. These reports make it simple to see and discuss any number of possible water management issues that may arise on a site. Because the WeatherTrack Central features are always online, that allows us as water managers the ability to use up-to-the-minute information to control, monitor, and report what is happening with our irrigation systems at any time, day or night. This concludes our demonstration of how information moves through the WeatherTrack Smart Water Management System. The goal of this training was to detail how weather and usage information is exchanged across the WeatherTrack Smart Water Management Network. We focused our effort by answering two questions. First, how does a WeatherTrack controller receive and use weather information? By detailing the ET Everywhere and the WeatherTrack scheduling engine, we revealed how each controller on our network receives a daily ET signal and what the controller does with that information once it's received. We also wanted to discuss what kind of information does a WeatherTrack Central controller provide. For this, we touched on the WeatherTrack alerts and alert notification, and we introduced some of the features that you can control from weathertrack.net, including key controller operations, as well as the information provided by our WeatherTrack reports. On behalf of the entire WeatherTrack team, I would like to thank you for your interest in the WeatherTrack Smart Water Management Network and for your continued support of the WeatherTrack products.